North Carolina Association of Rehab Facilities. I'm Melody Campbell, Carolina Secretary of Tissue.
I'm Cindy Ehlers, and I'm the Chief of Clinical Operations at East Carolina Behavioral Health.
I'm Bob Hedrick, I'm the Director of the North Carolina Providers Council.
Bruce Olin, parent.
Curtis Bass, and I'm with the North Carolina Providers Association.
Mary Short and Katie, and I am a parent, and I have a group of families of about 200 families, and they are severe and profound adults for the most part.
Rose Burdett, ECBH.
Gina Lemons with DDR in Charlotte, and I'm representing Benchmarks today.
Deb?
I'm Deb Godon with the Division of Medical Assistance.
I'm Kenneth Bosell, I'm with the Division of Medical Assistance as well.
Renee Rader, Division of Medical Assistance.
Rachel LaWill, DMHPDSAs.
Susan Johnson, I'm the Special Population Specialist at East Point.
Lisa Jackson, Division of Medical Assistance.
David to DHHS.
And last but not least,
Sorry.
we were doing introductions.
Linda Norton, parent.
Oh. So, any comments on the minutes from last time? Hopefully not.
Why does this seem so funny?
All right.
Recognize Susan.
Sorry. Any comments on the minutes?
When was the last meeting?
Like December 19th. Okay. One update that I'd like to give you from the minutes is that HSRI will be here, I think the 11th, 12th, and 13th of February. Let me just confirm myself. They'll be at that Friday's meeting. The 13th. They'll be at our meeting on the 13th to give us an idea of the final data for North Carolina for the resource allocation model. And for those of you with the MCOs, they'll probably speak to your CEOs the day before, and state staff too. So they'll be here on site for 3 days to kind of let us start looking at what our details are going to look like. So we'll go from 5,000 feet to the real weeds probably. So that's my update, and I made an error. I'll take full responsibility. I was supposed to bring my laptop and I forgot it. So Kenneth is going to give you his slideshow and just for the next item, which is the right.
We have the handout, but not the slideshow.
Okay, well, let's talk about it.
I'm going to pass out some.
I'm sorry, I completely forgot.
That's fine. So, what we're going to go over is the community living and support definition, which was put before it was called the integrated supports definition, and we felt like integrated supports, from your feedback, didn't really speak to what it actually was. So we came back and revised the definition, and we're going to pass around the definition, and then 3 scenarios which go on to the generalized training requirements.
They're still using the wrong form. Thank you.
Okay, so I had a PowerPoint that we had a little bit of an issue, miscommunication.
Oh, I screwed up, so that's all right. We'll
So-
be the last time.
Again, it's the community living and supports is that blended service between rehabilitation and the personal care. Like I said before, we changed the name from integrated supports to community living and supports because we felt like integrated supports didn't really speak to anything. It didn't really make sense. This is a service that's in the community. It helps people who are living in their community. It helps integrate them into everything. So we decided to change the name. we got some feedback from you guys and from local stakeholders, and some of that feedback was we need a service that follows the natural flow of everyday life. We think we got feedback that a blended service between personal care and rehabilitation made more sense. We got feedback that we need to address the needs of the people with intensive training needs without being too restrictive. We got feedback that we don't need to dictate how many hours of HAB or support is enough. So this is a service that's a lump. It doesn't matter how much HAB or personal care you use, it's up to you. We got feedback to better address the needs of people who have intensive medical needs, so we've implemented that in further. Make the technical assistance to unpaid supports optional and clarify who can receive it. The first time this definition was integrated supports was given to you guys. And right now I'm just reading off of basically what I would have had on the PowerPoint, because I didn't make that. So I see some confusion. So when we brought it out before, we talked about this generalized support concept where someone could get training from their provider agency, the family could, the unpaid supports could get this training on what works best for a person. There were some comments that that might be forced upon people, that they might not need that support, those kind of things, so we tried to address that in the definition as well. We were asked how to clarify limits and sets of services, how to meet exceptional needs, and clarify the term used, and that's why we changed the name. Are there any questions so far? Okay. So what is community living and supports? The intent of the service is to teach new skills and provide assistance or supervision. Our intent is that there's no right or wrong number of rehabilitation or personal assistance hours, that it's individualized and in line with the person's preferences, that it helps the person live successfully in the home of his or her family or their natural supports. It helps the person become an active member of his or her community. It can be used in short-term situations to meet exceptional needs, and it can be requested for unpaid supports, technical assistance to maintain skills the person has already had. So again, that's that teaching, training module that can support people maintain their skills in their home, which we thought was important to leave in. Again, we want to follow the flow of the person's day, and we want this unpaid supports. We want to be able to train people who feel like they need training or need a little bit of assistance on kind of techniques and different ideologies or ideas that have worked with a person, so we can help families who feel like they need that support. Why is this important? We feel like it's to empower and maximize the person's ability to be an active member of their community. We feel like this is technically going to enable the person to live in their home of their choice, support that, maximize the person's self-sufficiency, and maximize self-determination. So again, those are all of the philosophy behind it. How does it work? The person will learn a new skill and will be assisted in activities listed in their ISP, in their home, and their community. So again, we're supporting people based on their individual support plan. If the person has exceptional needs, additional services will be provided using the same definition until the situation stabilizes. And we're asking for a little bit of assistance with this concept. We talked about short-term exceptional needs, and that's when someone needs more than 16 hours a day. We're not sure if that term really works. So again, we can go back to that. Where can this be provided? It can be provided in a private home or in the community. We want to make it flexible to ensure that it's the most inclusive setting. Who provides this service? Direct support professional employed by the provider agency. And then this goes to our next point. The other form that I sent out to you guys, or just passed around, were 3 scenarios. We've kind of been having a little bit of discussion about who would do this generalized training. Should it be someone under specialized consultative services? Should it be the QP? Do we believe that a paraprofessional or direct staff person could provide this training if the team believes that they're able to and they get certain competencies that the team believes? So we just want you to look over those scenarios, and we can do that at the end and try to figure that out. Can a relative provide the service? And yes, if approved under the relative as a provider. Can the service be self-directed? Yes, and we would encourage more people to do so. Then we talk about what about the limits within the waiver? The limits on sets of services will apply, and then we're going to have that exceptional short-term service for people who have needs outside of that. And when we go through the definition, you'll see where we addressed it. Based on that kind of quick overview, I'm sorry that you weren't able to see it. Do you have any questions?
I do.
Okay.
So, I think the first question that I really want to ask that goes across all definitions is why in the world they have to be so incredibly long? And include all these examples and things, because that stuff in our system turns into the list.
Yeah.
And it's a list that limits people because they don't know how to think beyond that list, or it creates systems that audit people against that list, even though that's not your intention. And when we're talking, if we're really trying to meet the intent of a support structure, then if you don't put a list, then people are able to think broader than a list.
So you're saying you would just get rid of
All
this
these examples.
paragraph area,
All
the
the
skill
examples.
acquisition?
All the examples in the whole definition, they're not needed. And you don't see them in a lot of the other states who are on a resource allocation model. Actually, their service descriptions are like what you'd see in a catalog if you wanted to buy a sweater. Okay, they're really short, concrete, what it is you're buying, and it doesn't include all this other extraneous stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
And which gets confusing for every single person. Can I get that or not? Can I authorize that or not? Can I put it in the plan or not? Okay? Have I made that point enough?
I don't often disagree with you, so it can't be for what, but I 100% agree with you.
I mean, I don't know where that comes from in North Carolina. Even when you look at any definition, I mean, they're just so insanely
Yeah.
all over the map. And it seems
Right.
like every outlier that ever happened in this state, one time somebody threw that in the definition to stop that one thing from ever happening again.
And maybe
And it's
you guys
a
can-
forest for the trees.
Right, maybe you guys can help us then. I mean, so we have that first sentence on the second paragraph that it will help the person learn new skills
Okay.
and practice and improve existing
One
skills.
example is down there in the next one, like, just take them out, you don't need them, they're not pertinent.
Okay, do we feel like learning new skills and practicing and improving is sufficient?
Yeah, because at that point, when somebody comes in for services and it doesn't meet, maybe there's some unique ways of doing things that they've come up with, as long as we're meeting that criteria of learning new skills and you can justify that, then it should meet the criteria.
Yeah.
But if you've got examples and they say, well, no, it just doesn't quite come close to that example, then pretty soon we're rejecting most of the innovative things that would really enhance somebody's life.
Okay, so just to be clear, so that second paragraph,
So why don't you strike through and send it back out?
right, well, that's what I'm trying to,
Yeah.
So we would strike through, theoretically, everything after this first sentence.
And then your third paragraph, is where it starts with the word examples include. At the end, no, there.
Yeah, I'd probably say the first paragraph's all you need, period. The rest of you can throw it away.
But you have some, you say it in a slightly different way, so a heavy edit,
Right.
it would take out all the duplication for sure.
But the last paragraph,
Said several things in a different way. Obviously on the back page,
the last paragraph,
the page talks about short-term situations and those kinds of things that it can be extended as important information. So you got to tell what the service is. You got to tell in as few words as possible what the service limitations are. Because Medicaid, I think, needs to know what they're buying when they buy an hour or day of however the
other states do it.
building structure is going to be. Doesn't really say here, which is good. But whatever that turns out to be, you need to know what you're getting for that unit.
Right.
The other thing I'd say about that, the second page where it goes into all of that, short-term, can be used for short-term. So it feels a little bit like to me, and I thought this, and maybe I'm wrong about this, that this service was, the intent was to combine personal care and in-home skill building and do away with that sort of, personal care might still, I guess, stand alone, but the in-home skill building and personal care would be something that would be, you wouldn't have to clock in and clock out around skill building versus support around the personal care. And so this also seems to include in-home intensive.
Yes.
Which doesn't make sense to me, why you would want to jumble that all together, because that is an episodic service. It makes sense the way it is right now. Call it something different if you want. But when people have an episode in life, whether it's that my kid just got their feeding tube and I need help learning how to do that, or a trach, or some medical thing like that, or they're having extreme psychiatric issues where they need additional behavioral support until they learn how to handle that differently because life's now different. We've got to find a new normal. That's really more episodic, and so it makes more sense to me that that's a standalone, separate thing in that catalog that I purchase than trying to figure out as a family member or a provider how not to get dinged because we did a little bit more of this. And you have to understand the system's coming at this from an audit perspective, right? Because that's what we've done real good at for the last decade here. And so people in this system, whether it's providers, whether it's families, whether it's the MCOs, are all worried about that piece of it. So if you really wanted it to be support, you'd want to have a catalog description that was clear. Oh my God, we just got that feeding tube. Here's the thing we could get to help us figure out how to help Oliver with that, right? Versus, or oh my God, Cameron's actually having these psychiatric things people said he would, and here is the service that will help us through this little episode until it's over. Versus embedding it in this and that just, it's muddy. I think the word you used, muddies it. It muddies it. I don't know what the intent was.
So I guess, and I'll just tell you, what we were thinking is it would be a different modifier within the service. So that would, so it would be a short-term exceptional when these things are happening, but it's still built in one service definition. But I hear what you're saying is that.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether people agree with that or not, but is there a limit on the number of services we can offer in the array?
There isn't.
Yeah.
But I think the intent was because the service of in-home intensive was specifically designed to exceed the limits on sets of services.
Yeah.
It could be used as personal care if that's what was needed.
Right.
It could be used as HAB. So essentially, it's the same service depending on the need. It just exceeds those normal hours. So to build it in as the same service, it's not as confusing. It's just a matter of it's more.
Yeah, I think it just makes it easier if you keep it separate, that it is more episodic and not becoming a long-term support.
It's like an
From a
acute
managing
crisis
perspective.
to look at it in the
The flip side, just to add in is that, and I don't know if this fits here, but one of the other things that we were committed to trying to do is to limit the number of service definitions, because one of the things that we've heard from people is this waiver is awfully freaking complex, and if you're going to have an individual budget, you might be able to reduce the number of service definitions. So I think that's the sort of pull in.
But we still have definitions under it to have a catalog, I mean.
Right, yeah.
So, but essentially, it's going to be the same service. It's not going to be a different level of staffing necessarily. It's not going to be a different, it's going to be an amount because you need more.
Yes, I guess I always saw the in-home intensive of being a little bit higher skill set because the issue is a higher level issue. And maybe that's not the way other people perceived it, but it, yeah.
Not all the time.
It's the fact that you have a behavioral need or a medical need or something that causes you to need more than 12 hours a day of service. And it could be a medical issue. It could be that dad just passed away and the household is trying to restabilize. So essentially the tasks are going to be
Dependent on the individual.
dependent on the individual. So if you wanted to make it as simple as possible, you can still use the same service, you're just using a different modifier to get more hours of it.
Yeah, I think that, but I don't think the average family will understand that kind of modifier in that way. unless, because it doesn't have a different descriptor. So it gives knowledge to providers and MCOs that consumers have a harder time understanding.
But if you know that this is a service and you need 16 hours a day, sometimes you need 18 hours per day, the coding issue behind it should be in the realm of the provider and the care coordinator.
But I'm hearing her say the issue's more staffing, and there's something else I just heard, staffing capability.
The staffing capability wouldn't be different if it's just a matter of needing more hours because you just lost a family member. So the staffing
But not for
issue
the
might
family member, it's like, I mean, in Cindy's example, there was a G-tube.
right, but
That might not be the same level of staff.
That might be addressed by the rate.
Somebody with a severe psychiatric issue might not be the same level of staff. I mean, it might not be that same have tech. You might really need to have somebody with more training, more education, more behavioral supports knowledge base than your regular staff had. And I guess, maybe I'm the only person in the room that really saw in-home intensive as a little above the status quo in the current definition. Now it's coming down, it's the same. Okay, well, if that's what we're saying, then, well, who cares how, don't put a limit on the hours, and then you don't even need to say all that extra stuff.
The current definition said you couldn't access it till you used 12 hours.
And it had to be because something had happened.
And you had to have more because something happened. If you're talking about that staffing level and you need somebody who's more trained in there, you might be addressing that during the first 12 hours of the day with a rate difference.
So is it, if I understand it correctly, then it's a quantity issue, not a quality issue, or is it both?
It was a quantity issue, and it was the list of things in the definition were things that might cause you to need more than 12 hours in a day.
So it is not necessarily, as it becoming a quality issue. That's the discussion.
Because if that's the case, then it's two different services, and you're not.
That's what she's saying.
That's exactly what I'm saying, Deb, is that I always saw it as two different services.
And
As the administrator of that at ECH, I've always seen that as something's happened in this person's life that is beyond the norm, that is causing, I mean, if you're saying it's all the same and just don't put a limit in there, and who cares? They can use however much they want until their budget's exhausted. Fine. You don't need to even say all this other stuff in this whole entire paragraph then, if that's the intent. If the intent was really of in-home intensive is that something else has happened, it's elevated the situation, more resources are needed, then that is something separate than just more hours.
And I think in this paragraph, it's speaking of that. If they have to meet exceptional short-term situations that require hours of service beyond those available within the limits of such a service.
As a provider, that's how we saw it, and we would have to bring in more qualified staff, like for medical situations, we would try to find a CNA, 1 or 2, or a higher level.
But then aren't they doing that for the whole time that you're working?
Well, it would be, like, for example, we had somebody come out of the hospital that had open heart surgery. So instead of her having her regular staff, she had a higher trained staff.
To get through that, and then
Get
that
through
fades
that.
out.
Mhm.
But you couldn't actually bill it till you billed the first 12 hours of either have or personal care.
I think that if that was the intent, that isn't the way it got administered. They got added together. You didn't have to bill 12 hours of the regular thing before you could get the IHI. You might have had it all authorized, used it how you needed it
That's
in the
way it's
system.
written in the definition.
But I think, you might have had those hours authorized, but in what order were they used? There's no way to know what order they were. Did you exhaust all these before you used those? I don't think that's the way in practical application, might have been written that way, it ever came out.
So
I'm looking at Rose to say, is that, I mean.
Yeah, I would agree.
So I guess just to refocus from my own self, do we feel like that short-term
Yeah.
exceptional, what we have here, the kind of concept is valid, and maybe we want to take it out and put it in a different service?
I'm not sure. I hear what Cindy's saying. As one of the greatest risks to providers is that you have properly trained staff. And if your intent here, as far as the authorization of services, you have a duration of service, and if I understand, that's what you're trying to create flexibility for. You don't need a more intense you don't need a greater scope of service, you just need it for a longer period of time with the same level of trained staff. I guess from the risk standpoint, if I've got to send in a staff with different qualifications, either medical qualifications or behavioral qualifications that require different training, that's the thing that I particularly want to know, that you've got a different authorization code that has been authorized. I'm with you that the duration, I mean, what you're allowing is just a great extent. I'm not sure that this kind of thing could be handled with a care coordinator note that says, we're needing to exceed the limits, and somewhere you have a sentence on here that you're allowing the limit to be exceeded for special circumstances of increased duration of service. And so I guess I would say that if it's just duration, it would remain as the same service. If it requires a different level of staff, meaning more medically trained or more behaviorally trained, then that's when it gets into this special circumstance that requires a more intense level of training. It will be at a higher rate. And but I really like Cindy's approach to that it's episodic. The fact that you would get that service, it would be for a specified period of time for the staff, because you kind of got to plan a transition from that less qualified staff to a more qualified staff.
Yes.
And then back.
Yes.
Something that she said, that Cindy said, that I think we might not want to.
And what about enhanced personal care?
The hours, I mean, it's their budget. We're talking about flexibility and having more options. I mean, why put any limit on hours? If they want to pay for it for 365 days, 24/7, and that's all they spent their money on, I mean, I feel like that's the point of what we're trying to do. I mean,
Well, I would object to that.
Out there.
I would object to that strongly.
Why?
Why?
Because
Oh.
if a person has an episode that's beyond his or her control.
And we're saying the service in general. Why have a limit on it at all? If you got $45,000 and you want to spend it all on this, good for you.
But you would
Well,
still have to be
why would you
covered. You're asking if something happens, like an episode that they need a higher level or different service and they're out of money.
Right, but I'm
Yeah.
backing up from that. I'm saying that, like, as far as like putting any kind of limits on this particular service, outside of whether or not you have a more stringent need for staff or whatever, and you need to have a different service definition.
No.
Why put any limits on these hours, is what I'm saying to you.
Yeah, they would typically have
I'm
their,
just throwing it out there. I don't know, but based on what we're trying to do, it seems anti-purpose.
you know, you have a person-centered plan, you would have this specified number of hours that you agreed on to support the person, and all's going well, but then you have this, and you're within your budgeted hours, all's well in the world, and then this event happens to you. You have an event where you de-escalate.
Let's talk about that for just a second in a larger context of due process. One thing that is going to have to happen is if something like that happens and you need to request additional services and your budget goes up or whatever off of that base budget, that request is going to have to be considered and if denied have due process rights. I mean, it's not like we expect that plan to be static. So let's throw that out there for all these services.
You will change in your cost band if that is something that necessitates your cost band to change in that scenario, Bob. So you're not trapped at 65. Your needs are now 85, then we consider you for an 85 based on this new thing that happened in your life. What I'm saying is, why do we care what you spend your 65 on? Why do we care?
Right.
We've done all that formula, we've decided the clinical description, we've said this is the one you meet. If you want to spend every dime of it on supported employment, good for you. Why do we want to get into that? It's your plan, it's your life.
Yep.
Why do we care if you spend, why would we ever limit that? And if maybe you're getting supported employment, your dad dies or whatever, and now you need a little bit more at home because he was the one giving you your shower in the morning, why do we care if you change that from supported employment now to this thing, as long as your needs are getting met?
Well, there's health and safety, obviously, but.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to get into that.
So.
I don't even understand why limit on sets is even applicable in this waiver.
Correct.
In this new world we're trying to go to,
Thank
why
you.
that language would
Thank
even
you.
be in a definition is beyond, I don't
Thank
understand.
you.
I mean, does
a
everybody
hangover?
agree with that? I mean.
You're so correct. Thank you for using a thinking cap.
Right. So back to where we were going. So we're going to take out the examples and we'll maybe take off the hours. Then back to the other point of Cindy's is, do we need a separate definition for that paragraph? Or does it stay in there, that paragraph being that you have, for the exceptional short-term situations, because it's the same hours,
Yeah, if there's
but
no-
we're pointing staffing, and quality. Do these
I would
situations
say-
require a higher
I
staff?
think there's a higher rate right now too than your regular in-home skill building or personal care. So that would indicate that there's something different about people delivering that service.
Yeah, and they have to have an RN supervision.
Regardless of what you might have thought, the intent of it was in application in the real world, down in the trenches, it's a higher rate and it is a different
Different
service
staff.
than
Well, it sounds
an
like
admin.
it's a different need. It sounds like in
Correct.
people's lives, there's a different need, and that therefore needs to be met with maybe a different definition.
Well,
I mean,
given that what's still going to be occurring is either have or some sort of personal care, but it's at a higher level of staffing, do you want to qualify the staffing, or do you want to just use your rate-setting authority to get the appropriate level of staffing,
So then we
instead of
should
building
leave it in
another
here.
definition?
I-
No, we just take it out. If we're taking the hours out, then
I think the good thing about families being, or consumers being able to access something that's episodic is when you really do start to look at the justification for changing the cost band. If somebody's been getting this because something did go wrong, something did fall out, they got cancer, whatever it was, this gives really good evidence for why that should change. Because they could drop into this service episodically, but then when you go to reevaluate, and it gets at some of that health and safety stuff, well, they've been getting this higher level of thing because this event happened, it really does justify the change in cost band from my viewpoint.
then why don't we discuss that in the general section where we talk about the cost bands and how that resource allocation works, and leave it out of the definition, because if you need a higher level of staffing with any service, you would be able to take care of that with your rate-setting authority. So let's talk about it in general terms of the MCO has the ability.
Wait, no, I'm saying the rate-setting authority at the consumer's level, not the MCO. Okay, because they should be able to set the rates for the things, I mean, they should be able to ask for rates as long as it's within their budget. I'm not saying we don't have a role in that in the MCO world too to approve it, but I am saying that I see that budget management, I thought the consumer had some control on setting the rates.
But still, in the general section, saying it applies to all services is what
Yeah.
you're saying, which probably makes sense.
I don't disagree with that
We're gonna have
concept.
to, and as far as,
I think you have to be careful though too with the rate setting piece, especially at the MCO level, because what the MCO level could say is, we don't have the money, I'm sorry, this person needs this, you gotta figure out.
They can never say
because-
they don't have the money for these, I mean,
Okay.
if somebody needs a service under the B or the C waiver, they have to, if it's a medically necessary service, you can never say the reason you're not getting this money.
What's the criteria for establishing that need though?
They have a risk reserve. I mean, and that's what that risk reserve is for. Oh, you mean the medical necessity need? You have these definitions and you have a due process procedure. I mean.
So at that point, creating a broader definition seems to suit the need, having a broader definition with the ability to access those funds based on different
I
requirements.
hear your point, but they absolutely can never, ever, ever say it's because they don't have money.
Well, it's just because in the provider world, sometimes you run into things with different MCOs with, I mean, getting away from that rate issue too, when you don't have an established rate, and I understand and appreciate the concept of flexibility, but I also know some MCOs are different than others I'm working with, and, and providers do need some level of consistency in going at this to understand what are they billing for, what are they able to pay for, having that sense as they go into this as well. The idea, getting back to that, when we talk about from across the state, you can get the same things, right? And as providers, understanding and knowing what you have to work with as well too.
and I think there will have to be some baselines. You can't have free rate-setting authority on an individual level.
Well, we're gonna have to we're gonna have to set some kind of actuarially sound base rate for all of these.
Right.
But so what are you, I hear what you're saying, what are you recommending? That we be more careful in our language in the general section where we talk about the
No, I think as long as if in the general section, you're giving that ability to, like you said, the hours and the flexibility of saying if there's an intensive need, then you can jump into another. And there is some sense of knowledge that they have to provide, if there are those more intensive needs of requiring a nurse level supervision and things like that, that there needs to also be justification for a change in rate to help the provider then pay for the qualified staff that need to come in.
Yeah, to me, I agree that the concept is you've got the same service with the same level of staff competencies. That's the same service, and it's the same rate. But the moment you have to bring in specialized staff, have different sets of competencies, require more training, the rate should be different. Now, whether you do, to me, you can't look at the service definition by itself. It has to interface with the other ones, and or not. So you can either have this one definition, where if the intensity or staff training increases, that requires a new authorization, and that's an emergency. You get together, you have a plan, you modify the plan, you, for whatever period of time, would modify the intensity of staff and the specialty staff that's needed, and that is at a different rate. But it needs to be very clear to both the authorizer and the provider and the consumer family what they're getting. But it can be different. I mean, if it's a different level of intensity, different level of staff, it needs to be a different rate, and either a different service or a different funding rate band within the same service.
And that goes across all the services too.
Yeah, that's the concept that
Or the general.
needs to go.
Yeah, that general.
That's right.
So, in the next paragraph where it says it may be provided in the home or the community with place of residence being the primary setting. So, I thought what you said in the beginning was it was a community service, and this now gets it into more now. It starts in the home. And this has been one of the biggest nightmares of in-home skill building is that people have really tried to make, MCOs, mine included, that's the service that happens in the consumer's home. I don't even know why we have to say that. Who cares where it is? Why do we gotta, if we're saying it's to support community living, which I'm guessing really means not institutional living,
I
which
think
is,
the one
why does
caveat
that have to be
to that
said?
would be an audit trail. So and the audit trail being like if you're in an inpatient setting, for instance, and you're supposed to be having somebody maybe do some of the stuff in the inpatient setting, and we're paying for that out of fee for service, and you've paid maybe for some of the same service, maybe for the more special,
Oh, so the way you can fix that is in the benefit structure, it doesn't have to be in the definition, is you deny the claim when the place of service is inpatient.
inpatient, the first example.
I know, but I know what I'm saying is you could fix that on place of service. It could be, why does it have to, because what this turns into.
Outpatient in general as opposed to in the homes, that.
Yes.
What you're saying?
Anything that's a community setting versus a hospital, ICFMR institution, so those aren't settings that you would be approved when you're filing the claim. So that's really in a different place of informing it versus putting it in the definition. Because what happens here is people get all kinds of wild definitions about what that means. Is it any home? Is it only in my mama's home? Can I do it in my worker's home? If it's a home, is it my best friend's home? That gets real like, okay. And then it also gets that way on the audit side of that. So this wasn't in your home, it was in your grandma's home, pay it back. Even though your grandma's home is the home you go to every day after school.
So it does, you don't think,
I'm sure.
I think that in-home skill building is an important designation. I don't think it's even a reasonable interpretation whose home it is, but the concept is that the skills that they teach for daily living in the home, like grooming or cooking or stuff like that, it go at a higher pay rate than some staff that's just picking up the kid and, walking around at the mall. They should have a higher rate, and they should have to do it relating to the person being able to manage better on a daily, with daily chores and daily grooming and daily things. And that's why I think it's designated in-home skill building, because it's for them to really work intensively so that this person's daily life is enhanced because they have learned grooming and toiletry and how to wash clothes, but to help them be more independent.
And I don't disagree with that, I think you just have to be clear. You can't say community and home. If it's home, it's home.
Right.
But it gets real convoluted in the system of people trying to deliver services when it's as ambiguous, you start out talking about the community, and then in the last couple of paragraphs you say it's in the home. I mean, which
it
is,
says primarily, the home, the residence is the primary setting. So,
I can see why that would be tricky though.
so
I mean, if
it's
you're
divided into home and or community?
Why don't
that's the
you,
next paragraph.
I think you can, and what about if you just say in an outpatient setting?
Outpatient.
That won't mean anything to
That
people
doesn't
that
mean
need
anything. But, you know, I
Could you say home or community?
Why don't we just say it can't be done in a
Or
residential setting?
non-institutional setting?
It's not done in a residential setting, and it's not done in a staff setting. Because that was the intent.
Is that the
Because you
staff?
don't go to somebody else's home to learn how to take a bath. You need to learn how to do things in your own home so that you can become more independent in your own home. So I think that was primarily the issue. It was also to allow people community access to going to the library, going to the grocery store, but not necessarily having to have that integrated component that you need for community networking.
So what happens for the person that really only needs the integrated community piece of this service because they're able to take a bath and brush their own teeth, and or their family doesn't want the worker doing that for them, with them, or to them, whichever way you want to do that. That's not something that they choose to put in their ISP for paid supports to do to them. Because they're, for young children, that might not be something I want Bob to do to my 3-year-old little boy. I might rather do that as his mother myself. So when it comes down to the, we're going to audit this now, well, they never did anything in the home because they only went to the library. Is that going to be a payback for my provider agency? Because you've said it's the primary in the home, but you've also allowed it to be the community. That gets really confusing on application.
Why don't we just have in-home skill building and community skill building? Because then the thing is, you get a higher rate of pay than respite. And if you're doing something like teaching a kid how to ride the bus or going to the library or social skills situations, then they should get a higher rate of pay. And it is skill building, but it's not necessarily in the home. But if they differentiate, then it encompasses everything, and people know what that means.
I think that part of what we're doing with this waiver rewrite was looking at, so we don't have to constantly look at 15-minute increments or, well, for this hour I was here, but then this hour I was at home, right? And so really blending those two together somehow just so that you still have an opportunity, because really, like, the way I see this definition is doing all of those same things. It's the community aspect plus the in-home piece, but there's going to be personal care pieces that go with it, but still requires skill building at some level. Like when you hope that even if you're helping someone to do a bath and you're really taking on more of help, that they're starting to absorb some of those skills and learning some of those skills along the way. So I see the sense of putting them together, because then you're not doing, well, these 2 hours were this and this 2 hours are that, getting away from that. But I do think, though, with the designation of the it does get complicated with home versus community, because you don't want somebody to spend and misuse it where they're only doing stuff in their home with a person and things like that too.
What I'm wondering is that if it does in the home or community, and just drop the
Primary.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So I don't know that we've talked about,
Well, I think can you put?
That's under limitation.
Right, it's a limitation somewhere, I think.
so if we could spend a few minutes talking about, this is a major shift. This is a major shift in what we're talking about.
Right.
It is taking what used to be the sleep rehabilitation services, which you had to hire more competent, better trained staff, versus personal care and teaching people to do something, versus personal care and residence. The idea is putting these together. The challenge to doing that, to me, is that you've got to move up the mean to the level of competency required. In other words, it used to be that somebody with personal care or respite didn't have to have really good reading, writing skills. But if it was a rehabilitative person, they need to have really great reading, writing skills. And in hiring them, we had to assure that they were more capable. We were able to pay them more. They were able to stay for longer. There were all those assets. This kind of simplifies that, if I understand the intent, bundles it together. It's obviously going to look, which somewhat concerns me, it's going to move the rate of pay to probably to a lower rate of pay than rehabilitation. I don't know, we haven't really had that conversation yet.
If Russ gets paid at like $8 an hour and home skill building's paid at $12 an hour, and now you're merging them, where do you get to merge them at 12? That's really expensive.
I think the
and the thing is, if you're not doing anything intensive, say you've taught the kid, you've worked on bathing, you've worked on washing clothes and cooking for a couple hours, then you're just going to go play. Why wouldn't that just be breastfed? Why should they get paid at the higher rate? Because it drags the whole, it just taps the money from the whole system. There has to be a lower rate when they're not doing anything other than having fun.
That's a great question to me, but I don't think that's one that we have
I know, but I think money is important. The money is important because you don't want to waste it.
So can I maybe, because this is really an important conversation. This is the fundamental question of what we've been talking about. I think what we heard consistently on the listening tours is the complex waiver. Very difficult to manage if you're a provider or a family member because we've made it so complex. Part of that complexity has been these discrete service definitions that make people, I won't say it that way, that often often have people doing as you said, that you would go in between two different service levels. You have providers trying to pay different rates based upon what they think is happening to an individual area. Often providers wind up blending the rate, but not all doing that in terms of the rate of pay. And all of those sort of things that we did were designed to control costs. Ultimately, that's what those service definitions did. We used to, I think the way I would always look at it is that the way our current waiver exists outside of managed care in the fee-for-service world was that the way we tried to control costs was providing very restrictive service definitions that you knew exactly what would happen here. Well, the big change that allows us to do some of this without, I think, wasting money is that if you have an individual budget that is capped, and it will be, then inside of that individual budget, we don't have to be as prescriptive about how those services work and going back and forth. And knowing it is a big change, a fundamental change, but it seems to me, and this is my opinion, is that if we have an individual budget and you don't have flexible service definitions, I'm not so sure why we would do an individual budget. And that is the intention here. It is a struggle because it's walking away from everything we've known.
Absolutely.
And making a leap of, it is, it's a significant culture shift. But I think that's the intent. So I would say that what we're going to have to encourage and we're going to have to support is one, active engagement by families and people with disabilities in how services are being delivered. Because if the services are being delivered in your home and the provider agency has hired somebody you think is inappropriate for this higher level of service they're doing, then I would hope you would say something. And I got the greatest feeling that you would.
Care coordination, too.
And care coordinators would do the same thing. At the same time, I think we're going to also, from the system, be a little bit more, be much flexible about, I don't want to use it because I'm the one that says it too often, why would we care? To the point of being is that what we want to do is invest much more responsibility in the family and the individual of making decisions about how you use those services and where. And so it is a culture shift, but it is, I think, our answer, and I think the best answer to how do we protect the taxpayer in this is that we have an individual budget that can't be exceeded.
Right, because as a family member, if I have a certain amount of money, going back to the, not wasting, I'm going to say, well, I only have this much money. Well, I definitely need these hours for this. And then I definitely need this. So I don't have time. So I'm going to make sure it puts on me a little bit more ownership to make sure the services are being run the way that they should be. Because I don't have, I'm going to make sure that the individual that I care about is going to get the best for what they need. And if I have, okay, well, I could use a little bit of respite because I don't want them constantly always doing this, or, you know, because I don't think respite is going to be grouped into this. This is looking more at the personal care and the community piece, you know, of how I really feel like his time and what he needs from that time should be, and how to get the maximum bang for my buck during that time.
Well, I mean, you're going to have some pretty qualified people. Being able to set my own budget in my life, because I've done it a lot, I'm good with that. But there are a lot of people that are going to be walking into this, and you're going to say, that's why we have care coordinators. We got to have real good care coordinators.
There's the care coordination piece, and I think the other piece that at some point we'll need to talk about is how, over what time span.
How to walk that through.
Well,
So there are some safeguards so that I don't end up at the end of November and think, looking, I'm going in December and I am completely out and we're in crisis mode.
Well, and
One of the quick questions I had though, if that's the case, I mean, the whole concept of opening up these service definitions and just being extremely general is the key thing here. But you said that CMS's definitions for home and community, what's the community definition? Because to me, community is anything I'm doing outside of my home. If I'm going to my neighbor's home to take a bath because they have facilities, or maybe I just like taking baths in my neighbor's home.
Have you seen your neighbors?
I am.
Yes, I have. But you know what I'm saying? If that's the case, what defines? I mean, are we limiting the definition based on our interpretation of the broader definition, or does the broader definition give us a whole lot more flexibility than we're giving it credit for? Are we imposing boundaries that don't necessarily need to exist?
You mean as far as not allowing for services to be provided in providers' homes?
I think he means just community in general.
Community in general,
what good does it do to teach a person how to wash their hands only in their own home bathroom? It's not a transferable skill. You got to wash your hands at work. You got to wash your hands at the bathroom when you go out in public.
I think that's true. I think that's perfectly transferable. But I do think that if I never get to use my own washing machine at home, or I never get to cook in my own kitchen, or I never get to take a bath in my own shower, I'm going to somebody else's home to do it.
I can see the point
think
of the
it's
provider's
outsourcing.
home. But other than that, why? I mean, what health and safety risk is there? If there's not a health and safety risk, and this was the choice of this person under this more flexible, choice-driven waiver, who cares? Honestly, I'll come to your house and cook every night.
So what's kind of interesting, we've had this discussion internally at ECBH a lot. And so, I don't know if any of the families in the room would agree with this particular thing, but if you haven't ever had people come in your home to work with your kid or your adult family member or whatever, you might not really understand just exactly how invasive that is.
Thank you.
There, and they're there, and are they going through your stuff, and you just don't know. And so some people might choose to have the service delivered in I might go over and look at Rose's house and say, yep, I like your house. I don't want this cat in here when I'm getting the service because my kid doesn't like cats or I'm afraid he'll scratch it or something, so just keep it locked in your bedroom. But I'm really okay if you do the service here because I don't really want you in my house after school when I'm at work when you're there with my kid.
Well, and how's that different from I don't know, home ec for
You
crying
gotta give somebody a key to your house?
But no, but I mean, like, if you go to somebody else's house when they're cooking or whatever, how is that different than like home ec? I mean,
It's not.
Do you see what I'm saying?
But I think that
It should be a choice. Consumer's choice.
You don't like that.
Not the system's choice.
I think in some ways it's isolating to ask, the adult who lives with their family to go to somebody else's home and not
You're
be
assuming
able
they don't
to.
have a choice in that, Deb. We don't know that. It's their plan. They might say, that's fine with me.
But how is it isolating? You're putting them in somebody else's home instead of everything being in your home by yourself, and it's one other person. I think that's the opposite of what you're saying.
But people do take advantage of the system and situation, and I think that's maybe what Deb's talking about too. I mean, trying to not say it out loud, but let's face it, people do take advantage. I mean, I'll just.
They do it under supervision
Right.
too, I mean.
Even if you write it in the definition, people are still gonna take that consumer to their house if that's what they're gonna do. And that has to be handled in an entirely different way of managing that with that agency that has that staff.
I mean, I got 2 words for you on that one, that's community support.
Sure it is, but there's different ways to manage it than put it in a definition and think that's gonna solve that problem. It's solve that problem.
The idea here is about the person. The idea here is about the person. And if the person needs to learn to wash their clothes, they need to wash their clothes on where they're going to be washing their clothes. If they need to learn to take a bath, shower, they need to learn to operate the apparatus, shower apparatus, getting that in and out of that apparatus, where they're going to be taking a bath. It never made sense to me that some day programs for people with IDD, where they had a shower and they taught them to take the shower at the day program. That never made good sense to me. Teach the person to take a shower at home where they're going to be taking a shower. So, how we defend the funder here so that there are limits to, I can't really use the word, but at a national conference that I was at last week, they said, we must stop the stupid mess that we do. And I think that this is an opportunity to try to simplify some of the stuff that we do so that families have a more normal workflow.
And there's other checks and balances. There's provider monitoring, there's a care coordinator involved. So, okay, so you're the committee. I mean, what I'm hearing consensus from the committee is that you say community and home, period. I mean, it sounds like it probably is a good idea to add the caveat of the provider know and call it a day. Is there anybody on the committee that's super against that?
You can say what Connecticut says, which is provision of the services is limited to the person's home, family home, or in their community. And just don't even say this thing about the staff home, because that's where they end up getting it. That's the community. I mean, it's like taking a shower at the gym. Maybe they're at the gym because that's where they are. I mean, just don't, why do you have to even say that? You don't. It could be the community. That's what they say, and I mean, that's acceptable to me.
So if I may ask you a question.
I don't really care if they take the staff.
The,
Ask it. I don't see that as a reason.
Taking the staff home, I guess, was always considered to be a bad thing, and you're saying you could live with it.
I absolutely think it's the person's choice. And I think that maybe I trust parents, guardians, and individuals who are their own guardian, if you will, their own person, to make the right decision for themselves. Whatever that is, it's not my business. I don't want to have to regulate that as the MCO, unless it's a health and safety issue or somehow abusive. Then I'm glad to regulate it. I'll do my job.
Is there a distinction between if it's a staff home who happens to be a relative or a staff home who is not a relative? I'm not wanting to make that distinction, but is that one of the reasons why we don't want to put a prohibition on a staff home?
No, I think she's saying staff home, period.
I think it's up to the person. We act like the person doesn't have sense enough to make a decision. I don't want to go to your house, Bob. Or I do. I don't care.
I mean, some people aren't going to make this decision. Someone's going to make it for them. I mean, my son's not going to be making any decision like that. And there's also an issue of inability to generalize. If I know how to take a bath in my bathroom, that doesn't necessarily mean I know how to take a bath in someone else's bathroom. And since generalization is an issue, then, I don't think that should be ignored. And it's not, like, my son's not making any decisions. And if I'm not there, I don't want necessarily the staff to do it for their own convenience. Because they want to hang out at their house, and they can kind of, chat on the phone and watch TV at the same time. And, that's not the goal. The goal is that the person that might have difficulty generalizing is in surrounding that they're going to live in so that they can practice what they need to practice.
So let me say this. So you're a mom, and I respect that. But I don't respect you making that decision about what I can do with my child because you want it to be limited to your home in the definition. And I'm saying I don't want it limited to the definition for my kid because I trust my staff for that kid to go to her house. And I don't mind her going there, but if you write it in this definition, she gets what she wants for her kid, and I don't get what I want for mine.
Here's what I'm going to suggest, because I think we have a discourse. disagreement. I think it would be worthwhile, let us take this back and think about it. There might be a way in which we can split the difference, we can find a way that works for everybody.
It occurs to me that that would be something that could be part of the plan development.
Yeah.
That sort of decision where, you could specifically prohibit that at the client level.
It seems to me that if we're talking about a person-centered plan, if the regulations are general, then having good support staff that's working to put that plan together, that plan then becomes very specific, that works specifically for this family, for that family, whatever the differences may be, that's going to be in that person-centered plan, not in the overall regulation that may exclude this person or that person.
Somebody had another caveat to all the things that we've said. So there is, this is my opinion, but we probably should have said this in a ranking. The opinion is flexible as can be inside of an individual budget. The why do we care attitude, great. With the backdrop of, and I say this in a little bit of a joking tone, but I think it's important to recognize, is that if the NNO printed on the front page of their January or June of 2016 first edition, that this new waiver now has staff members for provider agencies hanging out in their own home, providing all the services inside of it. I guarantee you what would wind up happening with the waiver is we would be absolutely mandated to change it. So I say that only because you brought up community support. So if you recall the other things that, besides the money, besides everything else that happened, the largest complaint we got from the General Assembly is that all this is people taking these folks to Walmart, right? You remember that characterization? Well, good if it's worse. So I think the only reason why I say that is I think maybe the way, and I love the idea of it's a plan issue, but maybe the way in a plan issue is that as a presumption is that for a non-relative staff you would not have these things take place in their home unless the plan itself allows for that to happen. It might be the way to do that. And I think there's a way to make it in which we can achieve what everybody wants, but not have this on the front page of the NNO.
One other thing to consider is if you are going to allow that, are you going to cover the transportation time? So I pick Kenneth up and it's 45 minutes to my house. Is that going to be
no,
included?
that's not optional. Transportation's been based on all of our other Medicaid umbrella, transportation's in this.
So is that billable time for him to come 45 minutes to my house and 45 minutes back? I think then we have to really look
That's
at.
what he chooses to buy with his budget, why do you care? If that's what he chooses.
So you're saying yes. It's included, right?
Did you want to say something?
His budget, he wants to use that without riding in the car, or whatever.
Ms. Short's been very patient.
When you were talking about this being a blended service and was the rate going to come up to in-home skill building or down to personal care, when I heard that PBH Cardinal did a blended rate and brought in-home skill building down to $19 an hour and PC up to $19 an hour, that's the Medicaid billable rate. That's not what the worker's getting. I'm going with the rate. So I did the math on Katie's current approved plan. We'll sort of skip the discussion. Of her 4 hours of skill building and 8 hours of PC, God, how am I going to survive with an extra $24 a day? Because that's what happened. With the way Katie's services are currently written, it's an increase in her budget with this one. So this service definition, I mean, if it's going to be one rate, why would I bother with the paperwork of goals? Why wouldn't I just write nothing but PC and take that great rate?
Because we wouldn't let you.
Why? Does the waiver say, I didn't see where this says that there's required habilitative service. And then my other question to everybody in general is sort of, residential support seems to work. People have things that happen in that residential placement, you know, and they get out and about in the community. You all act as if, and I'm looking at this from the standpoint of an adult. I mean, Katie really is in an adult placement. She is in adult foster care, even though it's my home. I'm still her relative. And you also have not talked about this idea of relatives as providers. And how does that affect any of these service definitions? And how we're going to limit, if we're going to limit relatives beyond them meeting the job qualifications. I mean, there just aren't any miracle staff, and especially what's happened in Alexander County in the last month with the 27-person nursing home being abandoned, and thank God the police got there to get everybody out while the place was burning, because one worker went to the store and the other ran off because he had a warrant. And then there's the in-home worker who stole stuff from the home. So when you were talking about workers coming into my home and going through my things, even Katie isn't allowed in my office. So how do I protect my things from a worker? You all just have a very narrow vision of what this life really is. Every time I read these waivers, I just constantly think nobody really gets what this life is. This is 35 years. Miss Katie. Anyway, that's really, and give me my choice, I'll give you your choice, I give you your choice. If you don't want to be paid as relative as provider, well then don't. But don't come back at me that I have some sort of obligation as a natural support either. I mean, that's a real big conversation that needs to happen.
Just to jump in, and we've got other people. So one of the things that, there are a couple of things that I want to be real clear about, is that nobody is making a bias toward or against relatives as providers. None of that's happening here. But there are limited resources that any program has, and I think that's part of what we're trying to figure out, is how do you create a program that is sustainable and equitable long-term. And some of those decisions aren't always going to play out to where everybody gets everything they want. And I think that's just reality.
Give us residential.
So, yeah, you had,
I mean, it's, with this, you keep calling it a term, but it's a cafeteria plan. This is a cafeteria plan. So why don't you just, isn't it?
Yeah.
So why don't you just put a whole long list of services and attach a price and let people just do their budget the way they want to do their budget?
we have to have some kind of parameter to get approved by CMS.
But I mean, if you have like different categories, like in like my old job, I had 4 choices of healthcare. Each one had a different price. I would choose one. Then it would go down, and I had a fixed amount of money, and it had to zero out at least. I mean, I could have some money left, but I couldn't have any more money. And for each category, you have choices and assessed value.
I think in Medicaid speak, that's what we're trying to do. But the difference is that the cafeteria plan you're describing obviously had more flexibility because there were employer-owned health insurance options that people will do that shockingly, I think, had more flexibility than we'll have under the Medicaid program. But your concept of what we're trying to do is exactly it.
No, but if you have like a heading that says supports, and it has like, home and community support, X dollars, respite, X dollars, this, and then they can choose how many they want per week.
And I think, and Dave's right, I mean, within, we have some limitations from the federal government of what would fly, since there's a big match of them from them for these services. That would not fly. We would have to have something, at least a minimum definition of some kind. But within, as much as we can, within the context of what we're allowed to do, yeah, I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. But we still have to have a definition of some kind.
Right, but if there are definitions within the framework of, a clearly spelled out cafeteria plan, so people know what they're choosing from, and they can read the definitions of each thing that they're actually purchasing, they're essentially just buying choices.
So I want to ask a different question on a wholly different topic. So I don't understand what this generalization thing is all about. It makes no sense to me on how it would even be administered, what it is, what is it trying to achieve, why would we add that level of complexity to something you say you're trying to simplify. I just don't understand.
So if you go to the definition, we were trying to figure out a way that people could get trained or get extra education on ways to support their family members or whatever else in an easy way, and that the provider agency could get reimbursed for it.
So this is combining natural supports education into this as well?
Well, it's a little bit different. So this would be, you wouldn't need a separate authorization necessarily. It would be like you have a fund, and then you can access it if you need to. If you feel like you need assistance with your family member, then you can do so.
How would I know that, reading this definition?
Well,
because there's one sentence in there that says the word generalization, I'm supposed to know what that means.
Isn't this going back to that paragraph on the top of the second page?
Right, community
Is
living
that
supports.
addressing? And what I would suggest in that was just to say that community living and supports may provide technical assistance, because you're not saying necessarily it's going to be inherent in everybody's situation, right?
Right.
So I would just throw the word may there, but I think that that's what it's getting at, is saying that, and then you're using this component to kind of go with that paragraph, is the way I'm seeing it?
Correct. So we didn't get to that part. So we were trying to figure out who would we want to provide those supports. Could it be up to the treatment team? They trust their staff, they feel like their staff person knows a lot about their family member. Could they train other members in their family on, things that work well with that individual? And this, again, wouldn't be for everyone. This would be for people who feel like they need that extra support.
I think adding may is very, very important. Otherwise, this implies, yes, you will be trained.
Okay, so may provide.
I think there's a day and time where it's important to get to that place. But when I think of the system shift, I see this as something that someone could use to say, well, we're trying to shift from paid to unpaid by doing this generalization. And where we're trying to, it's sort of an anathema to what you're trying to achieve. And somebody inevitably will grab a hold of that one sentence, and I'm talking about in the third paragraph on the second page, on the back page. I think somebody will grab onto that and say, well, why haven't you done some generalization yet? Some care coordinator out there, some UN staff, some body, some auditor, somebody is going to come back and get somebody with why is it their generalization of these skills? Somebody's going to have an issue with that. Now maybe that's just going to be one outlier and only have one time and it'll get killed. But I just see where we are as a system right now for the last decade or more have been. Having that included here is just another way of maybe people will perceive it to be a shift from paid to unpaid, even though that's not at all your intent, and I get that. You're just trying to figure out a way to train some people that need to be trained. I don't get that at all from this definition or from this, what you've explained as generalization. I really don't get what I would do at the MCO and my job to teach Rose or the UM director or the monitoring people in network what the heck they're supposed to do with this. I could not tell you that right this minute.
But there are some good things about this in that I understand what Cindy is saying relative to the service definition, but I guess the long-standing thing we've been concerned with forever is how do we get technical skills to the natural supports. So if it's a specialized training, we got special consultative services. We can use an example of OT, PT, speech, whatever. where you would train the staff, the paid supports, and the also non-paid supports to try to generalize things into the home. That's really what we're trying to do. So sometimes it will be a professional staff, meaning licensed professional, like scenario 1 there, I guess. Then other times it could be a Q, but I do want to make a point about Qs. Qs and behavior analysts often are great assets to families and should be involved in the training. And if Q is going to do specific training, there ought to be a mechanism. So thank you for that attempt to the mechanism to try to assure that the Q is paid to do staff training, like the specialized consultative services person might be trained in training. You know, the other curious thing is that you know, if you look at people's daily living skills, often it's the parent that's the expert that trains the staff. You know, let's just acknowledge that that often goes that way. Because they know the person the best, and so sometimes they train the staff. That's exactly what happens in the real world. But there's several pieces in here that are good, you know, to try to get Qs paid, and
I have a suggestion.
some of Cindy's things.
One suggestion to Cindy is that, because I think what I heard, I'm going to put words in your mouth, I think what I heard you say is that good idea maybe isn't written in a way that you understand it, right?
I don't.
Let's take it back to the drawing board.
Well, one of the things I was going to ask, would you take a shot at drafting something? No?
I don't understand it conceptually.
Okay.
I mean, that's my issue, is I don't understand it embedded in this definition. Okay, that's what I'm saying, is I understood it as natural supports education, and I can expand on that. I could take it down the road of specialized consultation. I could get it there. I don't get it embedded in this. It's like you're trying to do everything with this definition, and that just is not working for me. That's the issue.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes, I'll write it in those 2 days, but I won't write it.
What we're looking at, we gotta have a place to start, and this is, for me, a great place to start, and there's a lot of work to go into this. I mean, I've written done things like this before, and I know as you get going, it's like the ideas and things, you know, what else do we need to include in this, and you end up with a great place to start. To go back and then to minimize it, to strip it down to, you know, you got the format here, now just strip it down to its bare bones and strengthen the support part, where in effect, the lack of a better term, the case manager, whatever it is that's going to be working with, beef that up, take what you have here and break it down to its bare bone minimum, and then go back and match that up against the CMS requirements and say, okay, will this pass muster? If it's not, then we have to add a little bit more back into it to get there. A great example, a number of years ago, my son was supposed to give a speech at Christmas time and tell a Christmas story. So we got this great Christmas story, and it was supposed to be a 2.5-minute speech, and by the time we got ready, it was pretty close to 20 minutes. And how do you clean 20 minutes down to 2.5 minutes without losing the essence of the story? And I think we went through maybe 8 iterations of that before we finally got it down to the 2.5-minute minimum. And really, when I read through it, all the stuff that we cut out was a lot of descriptive, a lot of fluff, but we really got the essence of the story. You have the essence here. Just go back, trim it back to its bare bones minimum, and then ask the question, how much of this will pass the CMS criteria?
Okay, so I'm going to go back one more suggestion. I think before you leave, Cindy, you're going to have to talk to Ken. All right, thanks.
So, any other comments from outside the room besides Ms. Short? Yes, ma'am.
We don't have,
I'm sorry,
we don't have specialized consultative services if that ends up being the person education requirement to do this. So we would not be able to provide this service if it was an element. Also, will care coordinators just start writing 5 hours a month of family training just to make things easier in their life? And then we as an agency be required to have our Q do 5 hours a month of family training. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but.
It might not be a static thing that's needed. Is that kind of the point you're making?
It might get to be static because
People
it's
might
easy
write
to
it that
put
way.
in the
Once
plan.
again, it
Versus
might be
episodic. Versus episodic.
It's almost like getting rid of that second sentence there. If you get rid of it, you just have that piece that on the third paragraph on the second page, the involvement is an important aspect to ensure. But I mean, if you say it up here that this can be provided if you need it, it's there if you need that type of thing, but it's not blended and made to be an important part of the definition. It's not so much.
I'm not sure how the rate structure would work. You have to have a lot of modifiers for all these different scenarios. I mean, is that how you would accomplish that, and rates within a rate?
Yes, and I hate that.
You know, that's,
That's gonna be a mess for rate setting.
yeah, wouldn't it? You think? And would you include a scenario for that mom trains the staff who's paid for that? Because that's really what happens.
Okay.
And would that include children where we don't pay them now? Because it happens a lot.
Yep.
I mean, to ignore that, if you're, I'm just saying, I'm not advocating for that. Please don't
Okay,
misunderstand.
so that'd be a hard sell.
I'm not advocating for that. But what I am saying is, maybe not the people in this room, but there are people who would say, this is, and I said this the first time we talked about this definition, there are parents, I'm one of them, that would be insulted if you sent a paraprofessional to teach me anything. Okay, or somebody suggested, I'm just saying,
Right.
you don't include it, it's not, it just feels icky to me here.
Right, but
Here.
there are some people that may want that. Like, it's an individualized thing.
Sure.
Like, I can't do many things that I do, you know what I mean? I need training to do them. So, like, if you're, I don't know.
Under specialized consultation.
So, just to go back, just so that I, can kind of make sure I've gotten all the feedback.
I have one more thing, wait.
He's awesome, I love Kenneth.
So,
One more thing.
Ms. Short, can I finish something real quick and then I'll come back to you just so that I stay on task? So the general guts of this, with the exception of that short-term exceptional, we feel like if we take those lists off, we're on the right path, right?
Mhm.
Okay? So there's an issue of the training, if that should be in here, and I understand what Cindy's saying, so what you guys know what you're saying. But that whole first page, if we take out those situations, we're on the right path. Is that
I won't say
correct?
another word. You take out, if you do that.
And then
On this topic, let me give that qualifier.
Okay.
Before I say that, Kenneth, though, I would, we are just seeing this, and of course, we want to share it with people that do it every day, or I do. But I do have a question. It's still the intent for community living and support to be one of the definitions.
Correct.
It's still the intent for residential supports to be another service definition. And it's still the intent for day supports to be another service definition. Because especially with home supports and day supports, there's been conversations with people in the room decades ago that if we were going to reduce the number of service definitions, kind of what Cindy was saying a while ago, differentiating by setting is still a limitation or direction that the funder wants to do. It's either paid residential supports where you're not living in the natural home, it's either community supports where you are and in the community for those people, or it's day habilitation. And there's not intent to, we're going to keep those three, correct?
To go any further than that would be one heck of a leap.
Okay. Thank you.
Last comment, Ms. Short, then we'll move on to the
My
next.
last comment is, this says, the involvement of unpaid supports in the generalization of the service is an important aspect to ensure that achieved goals are practiced and maintained. Okay, so if I don't do it, what?
It's just.
What? I mean, so why is it, that's my point, why is it there? So I'm just not going to do it. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're going to come after my guardianship and take her? What are you going to do? No, I'm not going to do it.
I think
I'm just being contrary.
So the philosophy of this is that if someone feels like their provider agency knows how to do something well with their family member or some, whoever they live with, that they have the opportunity where that provider agency can easily train them on those things if they want. So it's, a lot of times, like we talked about, it wouldn't be a G-tube, of course, but, there certain things happen. Certain things work with people with autism, communication. Maybe the staff person's really good at that, and the father or the son is having difficulty. So they just want to kind of get some added information, then that can happen. But you don't have to do it. So then we have these scenarios, well, who would be able to do this? Would the person need to be trained by a behavioral specialist? If the family member trusted their staff member, could they say, oh yeah, we would want them to do that? If you don't want that, then you don't have to do it. So it's just to make it easier that you can get training if you feel like you need training.
But this says to ensure that achieved goals are practiced and maintained.
Okay, so we definitely need to bring this back. I
Right,
mean,
so-
I think we've heard a lot, and I think we need to come back with some revisions. I'm sorry, do you want to say one more thing, sir?
Just one quick question, and it's mainly from my understanding. In focusing on the episodic aspect of this, short-term, higher skill levels, is there a clear demarcation between that and crisis services?
That would be a separate issue.
Yes.
So there would be a-
Perhaps it's in terms of definition, okay, yeah.
The answer
It
is
would be
yes,
a
there is.
crisis, it would be a need issue.
And then just one more question. So that short-term exceptional, we feel like that's valid, we just don't know if it should not be in this definition necessarily. Is that what I'm hearing?
And what's the long-term exceptional?
Okay.
The permanent long-term exceptional?
So I think I've gotten everything. And then, of course, that question about the community. And what the setting is. Was there any, I think that was it, correct?
Well, the only thing, and I'm not gonna, I won't preach about this one, but the transportation from the school setting and stuff, I get what that's angled at, certainly want to hold the educational world accountable for doing its piece.
Here, here.
But again, I'm not sure why it has to be stated in the definition, and I'm sure there's some reason. But if you're going to go back and look at this, so if I'm looking at this as a catalog and you've made that an exclusion, so I can get the support that I need, but I need to take off of work at 2:30, and because my house, and be there, or have the worker at the house to meet the bus, because the bus is only going to take my kid to the house, even if I don't want the services at my house, or I'd rather than be somewhere in the community, maybe at a Boys and Girls Club or wherever it is I've chosen. I can't get the worker to pick them up, but the bus is only going to take them to my house because that's all they're required to do. They're not required to take them to the other places I choose, even though these services allow me the ability to make those choices.
But we do need.
Now you've written this in here in another way that limits me.
Okay, yeah, we can
It isn't
figure out how
necessary.
to, maybe we can figure out how to reword it. Yes, it is necessary. I mean, for the transportation.
To say this thing about the school?
For the transportation.
Mhm.
Yeah, we can't overlay with anything that's the responsibility of the school system.
And the bus will only take you to the bus stop, not to the house.
But.
That's right.
But.
So if I can't walk from, yeah, I mean, there's.
It's like the parent that wants to take you out to go to the line instead of home. I mean, okay, but if it's gonna be, but if it's the school transportation, which is where that money's at.
Well, so when you define it as primary residence, you're defining it that they're going back home. But maybe that's not the first stop in service delivery after school day is over. If you define it as the primary residence as the starting place in in-home skill building, that made sense. Because I'm going back home because the service had to start at home in-home skill building. We're taking the primary residence out as the starting place. Now I may not be going back home.
As I'm sitting here
So why does this
processing,
involve you?
looking at you, maybe it's another general term that we maybe in the general section or something that we just say that,
For the limitations.
I don't know, I'm looking at you, you're typing, but like maybe that's where we need to put it, because you're right, we do need to differentiate for DPI, absolutely.
Yeah,
But
and that's.
this is not to supersede anything in the school system. Maybe that could be put in the limitation section, that this should, would not.
Because it would apply to all, again,
Right.
it applies to all definitions, if there's money in another program.
Then that's
because
required.
to do this, it's not
Mhm.
involved.
But if it doesn't do it, then you have the ability, if they're not required, then you have the ability to.
Can you do that?
Yeah, I don't think it has to be defined in this definition. Or it has to be in every definition.
Do they
Just
really
so you
not
put on every
take kids to the
definition, see the
babysitters?
general provisions that apply to all service definitions.
Yeah, all of general stuff.
All applies. Say
Huh.
that again, Bob,
You don't have to have it in every service definition if it applies to all service definitions. But on every service definition, you have to say, read the limitations that apply to all service definitions section, page, blah, blah.
Oh, true.
We have one more question.
Just one word change on the second page. DSP is solely responsible for the person and the needed home maintenance. DSP is only responsible for the person? Is that what that should read?
Where are you?
The last sentence, last
sentence
paragraph.
on the second page.
That's a funny word, solely.
Only is better.
Oh, so item 2 on here before the break was just, I think, just looking for feedback on the UMUR policy.
So the last meeting, we brought the UMUR policy that was from the PowerPoint, and then we haven't really got any feedback from you guys on that, so I was wondering if you do have feedback, if you can email it in, that would be great. We got some general feedback during the meeting. So we don't have a document here, but you can email it in.
I'm not sure, was that sent out to, I wasn't here at that December meeting.
It was sent out.
It
but
was,
I can
okay.
resend it. What I'll do is I'll resend this definition with the PowerPoint as well, so that you just have where it is and however.
Do you have a deadline or something?
I can do it on Tuesday
No, I didn't think we get back to you.
for the,
Oh, that's right, Monday's a
so
holiday.
with this definition, we got a lot of feedback. If you could give us 2 weeks, that would be great. For the UMUR policy, if you
No,
could give.
honey, they're gonna get back to you.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
Oh, okay, that's for 2 weeks for
2
this,
weeks.
for them, okay.
And then for the UMUR policy, when I resend it, if you could, maybe a week, I'll put a date on it.
And that'll all go through Renee, right?
Correct.
But we're going to take a 10 to 15-minute break, so all we say is an 11-minute break, then we'll get you back in 15 minutes. Before you do that, one thing is that this was a really heated, rich discussion. And I want to also say for in particular Deb and Kenneth, you know, the folks that work on these things put blood, sweat, and tears in these, and they're working very hard to do it. And I appreciate the spirit in which you guys offer the comments, because I think it is a massive change, and trying to figure out how far to go when they're writing stuff down is a trick. And so I just want to say that this is the kind of feedback I think we envision in the conversations we envisioned when we wanted the diverse stakeholder group that we had. So I appreciate the way everybody's doing this, and certainly the way that the folks are trying to draft it in the spirit that they've done that to get it out, because it adds to this rich, wonderful conversation.
And they're doing a great job, Dave, and bless their heart for dealing with the service definition committee, that's all I got to say.
So 11 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you.